As you probably know, the separation of powers divides government into three branches. You have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. But when exploring the vast library of knowledge that is Wikipedia, you might come across a rather curious fact. Taiwan does not have the usual three powers of government, it has five. To find out why, we'll need to go back to the early 1900s and the ideas of Dr. Sun Yat-sen. Dr. Sun Yat-sen was a Chinese revolutionary very important in the end of imperial rule in China. He briefly served as the country's first president, but was unable to prevent China's collapse into warlordism. To bring democracy and modernization to the Chinese, Sun founded the nationalist Kuomintang party and worked together with the communists. During this time, he designed his five-power constitution, which is the origin for Taiwan's five powers of government. Sun unfortunately died in 1925, 3 years before his Kuomintang united China. In Sun Yat-sen's system, the powers of government are called yuans. The legislative, executive, and judicial are there like we'd expect. They are joined by the control and examination yuans. These are traditional Chinese institutions going back millennia. The control yuan oversees elected officials and civil servants, and has the power to remove them from office in case they are corrupt and/or incompetent. This practice goes back to the Qin dynasty, whose rule started in 221 BC. The examination yuan is responsible for the government exams that aspiring civil servants need to take. This ensures the bureaucracy is staffed with the most intelligent minds of China. This was first implemented by the Sui dynasty, who ruled China from 581 to 618 AD. Sun Yat-sen thus took the three classic Western powers, which in China were concentrated in the emperor, and added to them two very Chinese institutions. Sun himself explained it like so. If we now want to combine the best from China and the best from other countries and guard against all kinds of abuse in the future, we must take the three Western governmental powers, the executive, legislative, and judicial, add to them the old Chinese powers of examination and censorship, and make a finished wall, a quintuple power government. Such a government will be the most complete and the finest in the world, and a state with such a government will indeed be of the people, by the people, and for the people. If one were to look at this speech, one could say that Sun just copied the Western system and added some Chinese flavor. That would be a wrong conclusion to make, as becomes clear when you inspect Sun's larger blueprint for the Chinese state. Where in the West there are three powers which limit each other, Sun wanted to create a government limited by its population. Therefore, these yuans are more like departments of government than powers in the Western sense. However, the Chinese population limits its government in Sun's vision. He gave the Chinese citizens four political rights. With the first two, suffrage and recall, the Chinese people could choose which delegates were most fit to lead the nation. And with the last two, initiative and referendum, the Chinese people could themselves make and change laws. Sun Yat-sen saw this as power being divided into the power of politics in the hands of the people, and the power of government in the hands of the yuans. With the five yuans of government and the four rights of the people, he wanted to create a harmonic balance between these two forms of power. To make this clear, Sun used metaphors like this one. The people are like the engineer and the government is like the machinery. The government has its power, but the eventual control lies with the people. On a local level, the people will be able to exercise their four political rights directly. But due to China's immense size and population, this would be unrealistic on a national level. Therefore, Sun envisioned the National Assembly, an elected body which appoints the members of the yuans, chooses the president, and has the power to change the constitution. This is the real separation of powers in Sun Yat-sen's system, between the National Assembly on the one side and the yuans of government on the other. That the National Assembly is a parliament is a sign that the legislative yuan is not. Instead, it would be a committee of legal experts composing laws at the request of the National Assembly or on their own initiative. Sun also didn't want the executive yuan to be a Western-style government filled with politicians. Instead, he wanted a council of technocratic ministers, appointed by the National Assembly. These technocrats needed to pass the criteria of the examination yuan. Sun wanted to prevent that the nation would be led by the politicians with the flashiest marketing, deepest pockets, or best connections, like he thought was the case in the West. It is clear that Sun was influenced by the Confucian principle that says that only the wisest and most moral scholars should lead China. Sun extended these meritocratic principles even further. If you wanted to be elected to the National Assembly, you would need to pass an exam from the examination yuan. China would thus be led by an intellectual elite, and even the body that would control all these technocrats only consisted of members of that elite. Sun Yat-sen's proposed five-power constitution thus isn't just a copy of the West with some Chinese flavor. No, Sun's idea completely rests on the Confucian ideal of elitarian meritocracy, with some Western concepts added to shore up the weak points. Sun's political system might not be Western, but it also seems to be very unlike the current authoritarian, or even totalitarian system of the People's Republic of China. It might surprise you to hear that the People's Republic has incorporated some of Sun's ideas, the biggest one being the National Assembly, which they now call the National People's Congress. They even made Sun a kind of cult figure and call him the father of the modern China. Sun's National Assembly might have been intended as a democratic institution, but that's not at all the case in the People's Republic of China. The reason is that all the decisions are actually made in a parallel state that is the Chinese Communist Party, leaving the National People's Congress only as a rubber stamp. In Sun's metaphor of the government being like the machine and the people like the engineer, the machine is marching forwards without any care for its engineer. Sun Yat-sen's political heirs are in the Republic of China on Taiwan. The Kuomintang is even still around. Here Sun is also seen as the father of the modern China, but his political ideas are not as popular as they once were. After the democratization in the 1980s, the National Assembly was abolished, as China's very large size and population was no longer a concern on a small island of Taiwan. In its place, the Legislative Yuan became the actual parliament, and Taiwan in general moved to a more Western system of democracy. Some are even arguing that the examination and control yuans should be abolished to save money. Sun Yat-sen was a Chinese revolutionary who thought to have devised the perfect system of government. By combining the best elements of the Western separation of powers and the traditional Confucian state, he would bring democracy to China. Unfortunately for him, it didn't go that way. While Sun's legacy is still present in Chinese politics, it took until more than 60 years after his death before democracy arose from China. That democracy is now debating whether Sun's ideas belong in the dustbin of history.